Violence in Mexico is spilling into the United States, bringing with it militarization of the border and questions about the stability of Mexico's government. Ted Galen Carpenter, Cato's Vice President for Defense and Foreign Policy Studies, believes much of the violence stems from the war on drugs being waged inside and outside the United States. He spoke at a Cato Policy Forum February 19, 2009. The full event is available at cato.org.
Now, in response to the violence in Mexico, policymakers and pundits have come up with a variety of solutions. One that is increasingly popular is to dramatically increase U.S. border security, indeed to seal the border, to quarantine the violence so that it at least does not drastically impact the United States. My colleague Dan Griswold will discuss that thesis in greater detail. Another one, which is the personal favorite of the Mexican government and some liberals in the United States, is to tighten U.S. gun laws. The theory goes that the cartels are getting the vast majority of their weapons from the United States, and that is due to lax gun laws, particularly in the southwestern states. And only if we would just tighten those gun laws, the violence in Mexico would drop dramatically. Well, that panacea, I think, is even less logical than the notion of sealing the border. Let's remember, when we're dealing with the drug cartels, we are dealing with people who make their living operating in a black market in another commodity. Do we really think that those people would have difficulty getting guns on the vast international black market involving firearms? I don't think so. It's simply a little more convenient for them to do it this way. We need to face some rather troubling realities. Point number one, there is no way to suppress the drug trade now dominated by the Mexican cartels. The Mérida Initiative, we've already funded better than $400 million in what is going to be undoubtedly a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year venture, is going to have little effect. This is patterned on Plan Colombia, and to give you the bottom line on Plan Colombia, despite some now almost 9 years of that plan, better than $5 billion. A GAO report that came out last year noted that cocaine exports from Colombia were up, not down. We have to remember that the global drug trade is a $300 billion to $350 billion a year enterprise. And Mexico's share is estimated to be at least $25 to $30 billion. And one DEA official in Mexico City actually puts it at $60 billion. There's an inherent difficulty in estimating the size of an illegal enterprise, but it's big. I think that's fair to say. Moreover, global demand for drugs is growing, not shrinking. So the drug suppliers are in a very enviable position. Point number two, where we need to face reality. It is the illegality of drugs that creates a huge black market premium and enriches the cartels. About 90% of the retail price of most drugs is due to that black market premium. It gives the cartels enormous resources to bribe government officials or to hire hitmen to take out officials who won't be cooperative, who won't be bribed. To give you just one example of the kind of resources they have available and how they're putting those resources to use. Over the past few months, there's been a major bribery scandal in Mexico's Attorney General's office involving the drug cartels. The bribes paid by one of the cartels in the area of $150,000 to $450,000 per month. we need to face reality on another matter. Because drugs are illegal, the most violence-prone criminal elements will dominate the trade. That is inevitable. The U.S. experience with the prohibition of alcohol in the 1920s and early 1930s demonstrated that clearly. During that period, the trade was dominated by the likes of Al Capone and Dutch Schultz. Today, the alcohol trade is dominated by the likes of Anheuser-Busch, Gallo Wines, and Jack Daniel's Distillery. Now, this is an intelligence test for my drug warrior friends. Which situation is better? We need to face reality on another matter. Ending drug prohibition is the only lasting way to dampen the drug violence in Mexico. Now, without doing that, we may still get a temporary decline, particularly if the Sinaloa and Gulf cartels, the two leading drug organizations, sort out the market and end their bloody turf fights. We've seen similar developments on a smaller scale in a number of American cities, that once the rival drug gangs kind of sort out the market, violence subsides for a number of years until you get new entrants, and then there are more rivalries and the violence goes back up. There's another possible temporary fix, although Washington certainly wouldn't like it, and that is if the government of President Felipe Calderon would back off from confronting the cartels. After all, he was the one who really escalated this fight by calling in the military, and adopts a policy of, and let's be blunt about this, appeasement. That step would certainly provoke wrath from Washington, but it might very well, at least for a time, cause a decline in the violence. But such a respite would be only temporary. The only long-term solution is to defund the cartels. And the only way to do that is to end drug prohibition. And I want to emphasize this point. It's not enough to simply have harm reduction, as good as those reforms might be. It means legalizing the production and sale of drugs, not just decriminalizing the possession and use of drugs. If one doesn't do that, the black market premium is still intact, and you're still going to have the most violent criminal elements dominating the trade. Drug legalization is certainly not a panacea. I'm the first to recognize that one would still have a lot of social public health problems in a legalized system. We do with alcohol following the end of prohibition. We have problems with drunk driving. We have problems with alcoholism. But on balance, it is a much better system than what we had during the Prohibition era. On balance, this would be a far better system. We've waged a vigorous war on drugs now for nearly 4 decades, ever since President Richard Nixon declared that war. And really, even before that, we had a prohibition policy in place ever since the passage of the Harrison Act in 1914. The intensified drug war has produced horrific consequences, both domestically and internationally, most notably now with our southern neighbor, Mexico. I know there are policymakers out there, particularly who have career and budgetary interests in the current strategy, who are determined to perpetuate it. But I'm sorry, after 4 decades of a strategy not working, it is time to try an entirely different strategy. Thank you.
Ted Galen Carpenter is Vice President for Defense and Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. You can watch the full policy forum at cato.org.